Yeah, so we have a group here. I will turn the computer, and you will see our group. It's people from Ukraine, from Belarus, and Germany. And now we're in Ukraine to speak about the memorial politics, the culture of remembrance. And today it's our first election, the introduction in all these things in Ukraine. And we're really happy that you can join us and tell us maybe about this narratives which exist in Ukraine, and the story of this of competition, yes, of competing narratives. Okay, so we lost some time, so maybe let's start, and maybe I will give the word to you.
I have a question. How much time I have for presentation and for discussion?
I think it's up to you. We lost half of an hour, so I think 1 hour, 1.5, as you wish.
Okay, thank you.
And then maybe we will have some questions, I hope.
Okay,
so it's our group.
Okay, hello. So welcome to Kiev. I'm talking from, well, it's Mazovsha, it's in Poland, and it's quite far away, and I hope that the internet connection will be fine. So, well, you know, my name is Georgiy Kasyanov. I am head of department of the contemporary history and politics at the Institute of History of Ukraine. It's a National Academy of Sciences. And I'm also heading laboratory of memory studies at Marii Skłodowska University in Lublin, in Poland. So the matter of our topic today is a politics of memory, politics of history. And I would like to start in Ukraine. And I would like to start with the major point, which is that memory, historical memory, and history itself, history writing, should be distinguished. It's two different things, two different occasions, two different instances. So when we talk about politics of memory and politics of history, we should understand that history writing and what we read in history monographs and scholarly articles, and what we read on the pages of newspapers and in social networks or elsewhere, these are two different things, two different instances. Probably the profound feature of the politics of memory is to mix and to confuse history and memory. And this is one of the most important things when we talk about, when we discuss the politics of memory and politics of history. Generally, these two notions, politics of memory and politics of history, are congruent. Generally, we often mix them. But in fact, I would say that politics of memory is mostly about commemoration, about memorialization, about public discussions about the past, while politics of history also involves things like textbooks, for instance, the establishing of official narrative, and even in many cases, even promoting this official narrative through laws, through legislation. And we can find all these features in the contemporary politics of memory and politics of history in Ukraine, starting from the end of 80s, when we observe the whole picture of the politics of memory and history in Ukraine since the end of Soviet years. will find very well certain common features which were quite characteristic for the end of 80s and beginning of 90s and to the 2020s. Now we're at the opening of the next decade, and it is really fascinating how certain practices which we see now 30 years after gaining independence, we see now in our contemporary politics of history, which are very similar to what happened in the end of 80s and beginning of 90s. So probably the most attractive object for analysis is the places of memory, lieux de mémoire, the sites of memory. And when you observe the events started in 2014, 2015, which started with the events which called Revolution of Dignity. As a professional historian, I have to be skeptical about this term, but it is term coined. You probably know this, probably you don't. This term was coined by the nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, Svoboda Party. They claim that they invented this term and introduced at Maidan. So since 2014, 2015, there was a kind of big turn of in this realm of memory, of historical memory, and this turn was called decommunization. However, if you would go back to Ukraine in the end of 80s, beginning of 90s, you also would see the turn which could be called decommunization. You know that the Communist Party of Ukraine was banned in 2015, not by the decision of the court, but by decision of the government. And the same applies to the beginning of 90s. The Communist Party of Ukraine was banned at the beginning of, in 1991. Then in 1993, it was restored. And then, well, in this case, after 2015, it was not restored, but it still exists, it still functions. They issue, well, they have their newspaper, they held congresses, etc., etc. So, very similar situation. And I would say that the vigor of the public opinion and the mood, collective mood, is exactly the same. So we have a kind of deja vu when something happened about 30 years ago, and when we see now we see the same situation when the history repeats itself. So the major problem, the major trend since the end of 80s and to the end of 10s and beginning of 2000s is a kind of coming to terms with the past, with the Soviet past. And this was the major trend in the politics of history in Ukraine. And this is why decommunization of 2015 to 2018-19 was so important and so visible and so instrumentalized. So coming to terms with Soviet past. Well, at the beginning of 90s, there were some instances, some cases, well, mostly in Western Ukraine, of extermination of the Lenin statues. And then we saw the same process in in the second half of 2010s. So once again, we see the certain practices which are very similar to other things like iconoclasm. You know that during the religious wars of 16th century, one of the major trends was to demolish statues of saints. So we see how it repeats itself in practices in French Revolution, during French Revolution, then during Russian Revolution, or during Ukrainian Revolution, the demolition of statues of sacred faces of certain figures, certain historical figures, or tsars or kings, etc., etc. So This leads me to one important conclusion, that the memory, the realm of memory, is sacralized, and when we deal with the politics of memory, this politics deals with something sacred. So when we see desovietization of or decommunization of the beginning of 90s or beginning or 2010s, we see the process of desacralization of certain periods of history. In this case, it's a Soviet period of history. And then we have another process when we see a construction of new sacred myths and sacralization of new instances. For instance, the elimination of the statues of Lenin and the statues of other communist leaders in Ukraine, renaming the streets after 2015. Excuse me. So in Ukrainian people say that if you do this, so you tell the truth. So in Ukraine, when there was elimination of one sacred entities and then construction of other sacred entities. For instance, after 2015, when there were demolition of the so-called Lenin fall, when more than 2,000 statues of Lenin were demolished or removed, then there was a wave of sacralization of new heroes, and it's very interesting. I would give you example of another person, Stepan Bandera, the leader of Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. It's far-right organization, which was very active in 30s and 40s, and took part in very important events during the Second World War. So now, after 2015, there was a kind of extremely active process of promotion of nationalist myth and the person of Stepan Bandera. And what happened? You know that, well, you don't know, probably you know, when you observe the statues of Lenin and the statues of Bandera, you will see that it's absolutely the same shape. Bandera is a Lenin of nationalist movement. Of course, Bandera cannot compete with Lenin, well, in terms of number of statues, because now we have about 43 Banderas, stone Banderas, mostly in Western Ukraine. And there was about 5,000 Lenins in Ukraine at the beginning of the 90s. So, but the style, this way of representation, the discourse is absolutely the same. It's about revolutionary, it's about fanatic, it's about the person who spared his life for revolution and for the good of the mankind. In this case, with Bandera, for the good of Ukrainian nation. In both cases, it is sacralized symbol. So it is important to understand that politics of memory, politics of history is about sacral entities. And this is why when you try to discuss it in terms of scholarship, which is about rational knowledge, it's about analysis, it's about deconstruction. So in this case, you, as a professional historian, I have my own case. When you come to public and discuss it in scholarly terms, then it looks like you go to church and start to discuss the existence of the God. So, and in this case, we have real problems with interaction with public discussion. If you, well, you will visit some certain sites of memory, and I don't know if you would be involved into this, but generally the discussion on this thing on politics of memory in public discourse is always extremely hot. It's always extremely controversial. It's always kind of it's like in Oliver Travels and Jonathan Swift novel, when there was in Lilliput state, there was a fight between those who were for breaking the egg from one side of the egg and those who wanted to break egg from the other side. The essence of discussions is exactly the same, because people discuss certain similar event or similar fact or similar phenomena, but they are ready to cut their throats, at least virtually, for something which happened in the past. So when you observe discussions about the past, about in Ukraine, not only in Ukraine, it's everywhere now. So you see that the temperature of these discussions is extremely high. And it is, in fact, it is virtually impossible to combine two discourses: the ideological discourse, the affirmative history, and the scholarly discourse. So the discussion can happen, but it will be in parallel spaces. And then, well, somebody would be cursed, somebody will be deleted from the public space just because he or she expresses, say, different views. And this applies to both sides in this discussion, or for probably not to scholars, but if discussion happens in the public space, then you have, well, real fight. So going back to our topic, to the history writing and politics of history in Ukraine. Generally, there is a kind of consensus about the types of history writing. Yes, there is an affirmative history, which is ideological political history, which is focused on propaganda and promotion of certain political, ideological, etc. myths. There is a didactical history, which is about, once again, very close to affirmative, which is about promoting the idea historia magistra vita est. So history teaches us a life. History is a teacher of life. And the third instance is a history as a analytical enterprise, as a scholarship. So if we would observe what is happening in Ukraine for the last 30 years, we'll see that the affirmative and didactic history are predominate the public sphere, while academic history, analytical history, limited by mostly by cabinets of scholars, and very rarely goes out for the public discussion for many reasons. So if you observe something in the contemporary Ukrainian history politics, just be aware that it is not formed by, it has no real connection to academic historiography. And this is about affirmative and didactical history. So do not put blames or questions to academic historians who works in the field of analytical history. It is about historians, because historians involved into affirmative and didactical history, but it is about those historians who made their choice. For instance, I know professional historians of good quality who involved into different projects related to propaganda issues. We have a project started in 2014 during the beginning of war in the East, which is called Historical Front. So it is military name, which is given to, academic project. And the idea of this project is to counteract in the field of memory wars. So, and professional historians involved there, and they believe that if they will tell the truth about past of Ukraine, so then there will be kind of outcome which would lead to better knowledge and which would help to overcome the Russian propaganda in the field of history. The only problem is that, in fact, Russian propaganda mostly exist in Russia, because Russian channels in Ukraine blocked, so we cannot watch Russian TV channels. Russian internet resources, majority of them blocked. Of course, you can use VPN, but you have to be somehow motivated for this. So it does not apply to majority of people. So these people who fight against Russian propaganda in the field of history, they fight in Ukraine, among Ukrainians, among those Ukrainians who are not permeable to Russian propaganda. So it should be taken into account that we have this kind of involvement of professional historians into this, and it is welcomed, it is politically protected, but in fact, it doesn't work as it should work because of purely technical reasons. So going back to our issue and to general picture of the change in the politics of history and of major tendencies. As I mentioned, the major tendency was the coming to terms with the Soviet past, and here we have a sub-trends. One of the trends is to neglect, just fully refuse the Soviet experience. To say the Soviet time was a black hole for Ukraine, that the Soviet time was a time of sufferings. The Holodomor, the Great Famine of 32-33, which costs Ukrainians around 4 million lives. Then repressions of 30s, then again repressions of 50s, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole period considered and perceived to be absolutely negative thing. So rejected. Another approach is that, the Soviet period, yes, there were tragedies and et cetera, but during the Soviet period, Ukraine formed its contemporary political borders, that illiteracy was eliminated and Ukraine became one of the most educated nations in the world, that Ukraine became a advanced industrial country, et cetera, et cetera. For instance, I'll give you one example. There was a military parade in Kiev on 24th of August, the Independence Day, and there was a huge plane flying over Kiev, Mriya. It plane claimed to be Ukrainian, which is just a manifestation of Ukrainian genius. In fact, this plane was built in Soviet Union in 1990. It was finished and started to work in 1990, and this plane was built by the whole Soviet Union. So now Ukraine is just incapable of building this. Oops, just a moment. Oh, okay. And now Ukraine just incapable of building this kind of plane. So another thing is the fact that Ukraine, in Soviet times, Ukraine became a cosmic power, that shows a space power. So we're still able to produce missiles, but this part of our industry is dying, decaying. Ukraine is still capable of producing aircrafts, but this, once again, this part of industry also decaying. So the Soviet legacy, as perceived as a kind of modernization legacy, as a kind of result of modernization of the country, when you reject the past, the Soviet past, as something which is not Ukrainian, directly or indirectly, you also reject the idea of modernization. So, and this is probably kind of direct connection between politics of history and broader politics in Ukraine. So first, neglect. Second, recognize and try to understand that it was an important period in the history of Ukraine. And third option is to nationalize the Soviet experience. And it's very interesting and important that it was done by different groups of interests, including nationalists. For instance, when the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory, which was created particularly for promoting Ukrainian national and nationalist narrative in the politics of memory, in the field of politics of memory, they, when they presented Ukraine in the Second World War, they nationalized certain figures, certain persons from the Soviet pantheon. So how it was done, they nationalized them through their ethnic origin. They promoted the idea of participation of Ukrainians in different allies armies, and including Red Army. So the Soviet period rejected, but certain persons from the Soviet period, including the period of Second World War, just were appropriated by the national narrative. Then, if we start to work to talk about the Second World War, as far as I understand, you will visit the museum of the Second World War. It is interesting that the name of the museum itself changed. For instance, well, it's the start of this museum, the start of the history of this museum, is a museum of the Great Patriotic War. It was purely purely Soviet standard. The Great Patriotic War started in 41, 22nd of June, and finished on 9th of May, 45. So the Museum of Great Patriotic War. Then there were several changes. Then the name was the Museum of History of Ukraine during the Second World War, during the Great Patriotic War, and now it is Museum of the History of Ukraine in the Second World War. It is very important symbolic meaning in this change, because change of the name, because Great Patriotic War is a purely Soviet standard, and this Soviet standard had to be rejected, particularly after 2014, because Soviet standard promoted by Russia. And in this case, and of course, the changes to exposition, to exhibits also occurred, and probably when you will be there, just ask people who will lead you through the guide, please ask them what changed since that time. It is interesting what they would say. I did it several times, and it's always very interesting. I also did it with the foreign students who came there for educational purposes, and they were really impressed with this. So another thing is that the name of the official celebration also was changed in 2015 by special law. It's interesting that the memory of the Second World War changed several times through laws. It is probably it's a kind of privilege to the event, but it also says us something about the importance of the event of the Second World War. In 2000, under President Kuchma, there was special law on the victory of in the Great Patriotic War, and it was purely Soviet practices introduced that time, in 2000. Then in 2011, there was another law on the banner of victory. So this law obliged state structures, state bodies, to expose the law of the banner of victory, red banner, during the official celebrations of the Victory Day, during the official celebration of the 28th of June, the day of liberation of Ukraine. It happened in 1944, liberation of Ukraine of Nazi invaders. So, and then finally there was a law on the victory of over the Nazis, victory of Ukraine over the Nazis in the Second World War. It was a very important change of paradigm when the whole period of 39 to 45 was recognized at official level, and it was in fact it banned the Soviet memory of the Second World War or the Great Patriotic War altogether. But the major problem with that lies in the field of sociology. So the name of the day was changed. There were two dates introduced: 8th of May, the day of remembrance, and 9th of May, the Victory Day. It's, well, Soviet date. But the problem was that, according to sociological polls, the Victory Day, the Soviet Victory Day, belongs to one of the most popular celebrations in anniversaries in Ukraine. After New Year, after the Christmas, and interesting, after the 8th of March, the International Women's Day. So it's also came from Soviet times. So my point is that the expectations of politicians and those who promote certain agenda in the field of historical politics and reactions of population sometimes very different. And another important point about this is that these differences got regional shapes. For instance, the territories where the Soviet nostalgic narrative of the past, including the memory of the Great Patriotic War, not the Second World War, they are mostly popular. These perceptions are mostly popular in the south and the east of Ukraine. While the new mythology and new symbolics mostly appropriated in the Western Ukraine, and the Central Ukraine is always a bit, let's say, a bit ambivalent. So you can see the mix there of preferences. So, and these regional divisions are very important. I will give you one example how history works, or historical politics works against its promoters. We had a presidential elections and parliamentary elections in 2019, and when you compare the sociology maps, which are based on the attitudes towards politics, historical politics, and electoral maps, we will see that the maps based on the polls, and there were about 10 polls, sociological polls about decommunization and about different historical issues and issues related to the politics of memory. So you will see that the regions which were not happy with the politics of history after 2015, that these regions, in its south and east, voted against Poroshenko, who was at the top of the politics of history after 2015. And the same happened during the parliamentary elections. So, of course, I'm not enthusiastic to give a direct link and say that this was the major factor which played its role in the overturn of Poroshenko and his party. But this is not just coincidence. It is exactly about reactions towards the politics of history and the politics of memory and the politics of decommunization. So I do not judge here and say that, well, they are less advanced, this territory is less advanced or pro-Soviet. No, they just did not accept the way how decommunization was implemented, because it was implemented, and this is another interesting thing about politics of history, the decommunization was in fact desovietization, but this decommunization, desovietization was made in very Soviet way. So the decommunizers were very Soviet people in their attitudes, behavior, and mode of thinking and doing things. So how it was done? It was done in a very sufficient manner, the decommunization in Ukraine. 4 laws were elaborated. I know that these laws were written by 2 or 3 people from the circles of organization, which name is Center for Study of Liberation Movement. And is, surprise, surprise, this center presented by Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, right-wing organization, as their facade structure. They say this openly. So people from the circles of this Center for Study for Liberation Movement, which is Center for Study of Ukrainian Nationalist Movement. So not about the study, but about the apologetic promotion of the myth of this movement. So they prepared 4 laws. And remember, I told you that the elimination of Soviet narrative was followed by the promotion of nationalist narrative. So they introduced the politics through these 4 memory laws, which were passed by the parliament in 9th of April 2015. Within 42 minutes, by the way. The whole discussion lasted 42 minutes. So it was purely political enterprise to write laws, to introduce them, and then to say people in the whole country, follow these laws. You have to follow these laws. You have to be lawful. And then what happened? So this law really were implemented. One of these laws banned the use of communist symbols in public space. To enhance this law also mentioned Nazi symbols in the public space. So it was quite comme il faut, yeah? Just we banned communist and Nazi symbols. And then we introduce criminal liability for this, up to 5 years, with confiscation of your property. So you can put red star on your T-shirt, and then you are under danger of spending 5 years in the prison and your property confiscated. So think twice before doing this, before putting red star with a hammer and sickle into your T-shirt. And it applies to foreign citizens, by the way. So they added Nazi symbols to enhance the anti-communist content of this law. But it is also interesting that Nazi symbols were reduced only to the symbols of NSDAP, to the symbols of party symbols of Nazi party. So we had several occasions of promotion of division SS Galizien. It was SS division, Ukrainian division of SS Galizien. And we have absolutely unlimited promotion of the myth of this idea of this division as a division which fought for the freedom of Ukraine. The only problem with this division that they fought for the freedom of Ukraine within SS Waffen SS. But when there was discussion about this, and where people asked, so there is a law which bans the Nazi symbols together with communist symbols. But then the response was very, very simple. Just, well, it is not NSDAP symbols. The SS symbols are not NSDAP symbols. So it is illegal to put the red star on your T-shirt, but you can put SS symbols on your T-shirt, and you even will be praised if you will be in Western Ukraine. This is about politics of history as a political enterprise of certain group of people. So I will talk a bit more about the actors who promote this. Of course, the major actor of politics of history is still the state. And then it is important to promoters of the politics of history to catch up the positions in the state to promote certain kind of politics of the past. In 2006, under Yushchenko, the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory was established as a body of executive power. And there were about 28 functions prescribed for this institute in the realm of politics of memory. So this institute became a major body responsible for the politics of memory. However, if you would count the number of institutions involved into this, I did it. So in Ukraine, it is, well, in different times, it is from 18 to 22 institutions, organs, bodies of executive power, legislative power, etc., who involved into the politics of memory. More than, about 22 institutions, including Institute of National Memory, including president, including parliament, including parliamentary committees, including local local bodies of executive power, like presidential administrations, including Ministry of Interior, Constitutional Court, courts, local courts, etc., etc. So 22 institutions who involved into development and promotion of the politics of memory. And you will see some of them. Well, you will go to museum. Museums are also a part of this. So then we have a non-governmental organizations, for instance, political parties. If we would look to the politics of memory implemented after 2015, I mean decommunization and promotion of right-wing nationalism. So you will, and then you would observe the political program of Svoboda Party, which is nationalist right-wing party. Then you will see that the politics of memory is in fact implementation of major point from the political program of Svoboda Party. And it is really interesting because really it's amazing, because Svoboda Party was not able to come to even to parliament in 2014 and in 2019. In 2019, Svoboda managed to be elected with one MP. And so we have one MP from Svoboda Party in the parliament. Before that, in 2016, there were 6 members of Svoboda Party in the parliament. So they were not able even to establish a faction there. So at the presidential elections, the representatives of Svoboda Party or other right-wing organizations always got about 1%, 1.5% of votes at presidential. So they are not presented in the field, in the top bodies of Ukrainian politics. However, they, the nationalists, were able to permit the some state organs, for instance, the State Committee on TV and radio, Parliament, well, not through their direct representatives, Minister of Interior, and most important, the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. The head of this institute in 2015, 2020, Mr. Vyatrovich, he was not member of Svoboda, but he had people, for instance, two members of Svoboda from were in the staff of the Institute of National Memory, not two, four. Now there are two there. So they, people from other pro-nationalist organizations were dispersed through local bodies of power. And in fact, this was used to promote nationalist agenda in the politics of memory. And they were successful in this, to promote the idea of decommunization. So the actors, political parties, or non-governmental organizations, for instance, Center for the Study of Liberation Movement, it is non-governmental organization, even without fixed legal status. It is not it's not in the register of non-governmental organizations. And so on, so on. So social media, if you would observe social media, for instance, Facebook, you will see a number, hundreds of different groups, social groups, which present different views on the politics of memory. And sometimes they might be influential, particularly if they are organized by those who are in the state bodies. So social media, well, historians also, as I mentioned, historians take part in this, either as a propaganda promoters, or as those who try to oppose them in terms of counter-propaganda, or those who try to analyze them. This is about by the way, this is about the politics and your ability to stay away from the politics. When you go to public space as an academic historian and you say, I do not want to be involved into political discussions. I just want to bring you to deliver you a scientific vision and scientific truth. So this is my mission. And then when you go there, you're immediately involved into the politics of history, and you have to to wash yourself from very different various accusations and blames, etc., etc. So it is virtually impossible to historian to be uninvolved into the politics of memory, even if you want to sit in the tower, ivory tower, and to be isolated from from this kind of stuff. So to sum up, to finalize about the politics of memory in Ukraine, politics of history, it is extremely controversial. Probably Ukraine also can match the famous expression of Winston Churchill, who said this about Balkans. He said that Balkans produce too much history, which they are not able to consume. Ukraine produced too much history. Ukraine definitely have some problems with the dietary requirements. In this case, we're really overfed with history. Another important thing about this is that history also actively used by different parties, I mean, not political parties, by different parties in terms of representation of the society. So history is actively used by different parties to distract attention from social issues. I already found this kind of algorithm. All discussions about the past start actively in our public space exactly before certain shifts in social politics. For instance, before raise of prices on gas, for instance. So if you observe some kind of activization of discussions on the history, on Bandera, on Lenin, or whatever, then please be ready that next week or even next day there will be jump of prices in Ukraine, or some other not very attractive things would happen in the social field. So it is used as a spoiler for as a smokescreen for certain political decisions or economical shifts, etc., etc. And the final point is that despite all this, it is also amazing is that the politics of history, it is not totality. It is not something which presented in everyday life and every day. When you go to streets and ask people about the past, I did it many times. I spoke to waiters, to taxi drivers, to different people who were staying next to certain statues, etc. I just asked them, how important it to you? Well, the problems of the past. So 100%, no, 99% people, well, in many cases, they just didn't know what I'm asking them about. They just, when my graded student asked people about Lenin, when Lenin was still at the site, who is this? Young people were not able to say, who is this? They were just didn't know who is this. When they read the signature sign, they say, oh, it's Lenin. Who is Lenin? I don't know who is Lenin. Just so people are not aware of this. And when we observe the politics of history and we observe discussions, hot discussions, clashes of opinions, etc., please be aware of the fact that it is not totality. It happens from, it's a kind of pulsation of the politics of memory, and it's totally depend on the mobilization efforts of people at the top, of those who does politics, of those who promote certain issues. So they take this issue, they instrumentalize it, they put it to the public space, people started to be excited and started to discuss it. Then the, let's say, normal, regular life starts and people live normal, regular life. For many of them, it's just a matter of, this life is a matter of survival. For many, for majority of them, it's a matter of families, of your children, of school, whatever. So it is not politics of history. It's not something which irritates people every day. It is highly instrumentalized. It is used for mobilization, and it is sometimes it is really inconsistent. I would like to stop here and would invite you to the questions and to discussion. Hope it was a quite. I hope it was not very boring. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgiy. And sorry, we don't have a microphone, so we'll do it this way, I think. So it's the chair for the questions. And yes, if you want to ask something, please come here, sit at this chair and ask. Do you have questions? Also, maybe if the people who are joining us in Zoom, if you have, if you want to ask something, you can write it on chat or just turn on your microphone and video and also join us.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Kasyanov, thank you for the presentation of different narratives. It seems for me, when you're outside on the street, that there is a broad consensus in society about the role of the nation. And like outside, we have seen a lot of flags and national symbols. And you presented the three narratives about Soviet time as a black hole, of the time of modernization, and the nationalizing of the Soviet. And I asked myself, at any time in the last 3 decades, have been voices which are saying all our remembrance, our politics, our history is shaped in the form of the nation. We have to think about this. Maybe we have to develop different ways. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's national narrative is it's a kind of natural shape for the nation state. So we have the major problem with this in Ukraine is that according to intellectual tradition of Ukraine, we have the national narrative is mostly presented as ethnic narrative. So in simple terms, it means that Ukrainian nation is it's Ukrainian ethnic Ukrainians. So when we speak about national narrative in Ukraine, we speak about history of Ukraine as a history of Ukrainians as ethnic group. And this is real problem for Ukraine because first of all, Ukrainians as ethnic group are very diverse. If you go to Transcarpathia and we'll talk to local people, you will see that they talk and they look very different from people from Poltava region. Or if you go to Kherson, you will see another picture. So it is a very diverse country, and even in terms of Ukrainian ethnos, Ukrainians as an ethnic group, it is also very diverse. And so what's called nationalization of Ukraine in 19th, for instance, and nationalization of the past, it was also nationalization of Ukrainians themselves, ethnic Ukrainians, turning them into kind of homogeneous entity. But the second problem after that, so okay, you made Ukrainians, ethnic Ukrainians homogeneous, but then you have Jews, Germans, Russians, Poles, Greeks, Bulgarians, etc., Karayats. You have about, I don't know how many now, but according to the census of 2001, it unfortunately was the last census in Ukraine. According to that census, it's about a quarter of population, those who do not belong to Ukrainian ethnic group, to ethnic Ukrainians. And this also poses the problem of inclusion of this group in the national narrative. But if you base your national narrative on the selection, based on selection of ethnic groups, so then about 20% of populations is out of this narrative. So, this is an intrinsic problem of Ukrainian identity. And now I see that there was this very slow turn towards recognition of the idea of nation as a political entity. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in the field of the politics of memory. It is still ethnocentric. It is still based on the idea that the history of Ukraine is a history of Ukrainians, of ethnic Ukrainians, not political nation. And this also incurs problems like recognition of the Holocaust, for instance. Holocaust still not perceived by Ukrainians as a event which is connected to ethnic Ukrainian history, national Ukrainian history in ethnic terms. There were two, well, just imagine that there were more than a dozen sociological polls about Holodomor, about the Great Famine and about the fate of Ukrainians. And there were virtually no opinion polls about Holocaust until 2020. So about 1.5 million Jews disappeared in Ukraine during the Second World War. And then, well, people were asked by sociologists about Holodomor, about repressions, about prominent figures, political figures, etc., but never were asked about Holocaust. And that they were neighbors, you know, they lived here. Jews lived here from 10th century. Jews played extremely important role in cultural development of Ukraine. And so no questions about them, about Holocaust, how they were exterminated. Another problem is that when you promote national narrative and you promote the idea of national heroes, national myth, etc., particularly after 2014, a part of this mythology is a mythology of Ukrainian nationalists, of Bandera, Shukhevich, etc., and it also provokes another tension because Ukrainian nationalists collaborated with Nazis in extermination of Jews. Not Ukrainians as a nation, but Ukrainians who were members of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, both factions, Banderovцы, Melnikivцы, whatever. So, and this is another problem, how to recognize Holocaust and at the same time recognize those who took part in Holocaust as national heroes. So, to sum up, the national narrative is a natural way of organization of the past. However, it means it depends of what do you mean by the nation. If the meaning of the nation is a collectivity of ethnic group, so it's one case. If the meaning of the nation is a political entity, the citizenship, Ukrainians as a citizens of Ukraine, it might be a very different story. Yeah.
Yes. We have a question in the chat. You can read it, and also I will try to read it. Thank you very much for the lecture. My question is, what exactly characterized the dehumanization in Ukraine as a typical Soviet one? Is this type of thinking of a form of representation of new historical figures?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it's a. Well, I already gave you an example of statues. Yes, statues of Lenin and statues of Bandera are very simple. So Bandera in this representation is very Soviet. He looks like Lenin. Well, you can make some changes and then you will confuse it with Lenin. If we talk about the ways of implementing, yeah, it's the way of it's so-called. You probably don't remember or do not know this, but at the beginning of 90s, the Soviet system was blamed to be administrative, directive, and over-centralized. If you look at the way of elaboration and implementation of the politics of decommunization, you will see absolutely the same. Of course, there were, let's say, imitations of the public discussions. For instance, when it was when the renaming of the streets, there were more than 50,000 topographical objects which were renamed, which lost their Soviet names. So there were or renaming of the cities and villages. More than 1,002. No, exactly 1,002 or 1,006, I don't remember exactly, cities and villages were renamed. And during this process, there were so-called public hearings organized. Somewhere they were organized, some they were organized only on the paper, but nevertheless, in the cases when the opinion of local people did not coincide with the opinion of the center of the people in the Institute of National Memory. So the decision was made in the favor of the center. So I will give you one example. There are numerous examples. I will give you, no, let's give you two. Yeah. First, Komsomolsk. There was the city of Komsomolsk, which was established in 1960. There was nothing at this place when the city was established. So the Komsomolsk is a historical name for this city because there was no city, then city appeared and it was named Komsomolsk. So, and then local community was urged to rename it. And there were 16 options to rename it. Probably the most popular was Sviato-Nikolaevsk after St. Nicholas. However, in the center, they also tried to keep the old name, old new name Komsomolsk, and they tried to decipher this as a abbreviation of something like Cossacks. Something I cannot translate it. It's every letter was for some word, and then it was about Cossacks. So it was rejected, and the city was renamed by the center into Horishny Plavny. Horishny Plavny, it was a very small, it was not even village. It was several houses, so-called hutir, which was, there was this name there, but it is the name of the village or of the something, a very small village. And it's nothing about the, this city is an industrial center. It's a huge plant there, and it was built for this plant. It's still functioning, and it is still successful. However, so people, when they called themselves Komsomolцы, they spoke about themselves as those who work and live in industrial city, in modern city. To them, Horishny Plavny is about village, is about backwardness, etc. But decision was made by the center. Or the city of Kirovohrad, now it is Kropivnitsky, named after the literate figure from 19th century, writer and dramaturgist. So they, the local community during the campaign of decommunization voted for taking back the historical name of the city, which was Yelizavetgrad, which was called, this also was established after the name of Elizabeth, the Empress of Russian Empire. According to the law, only names of communist leaders not accepted, or communist functionaries. Elizabeth, the Empress of Russia, never been a member of the Communist Party, as you can imagine. However, they decided to decommunize Elizabeth, and then the city was renamed into Kropivnitsky. But the oblast, the region, is still has name of Kirovohradska, because they need 300 votes in the parliament to rename it. It's needed to change constitution. So these are two examples of this top-down approach and the imposing something without real discussion, because it is also Soviet feature to have a plan, like 5 years plan, and there was a plan of decommunization. So the streets should be decommunized to this date, the cities should be decommunized to this date, etc., etc. And they were in extreme rush because the initiators of decommunization believed that political situation can change very quickly, and then they would not be able to implement it. So they were in great rush. They imposed this this mode of decommunization, and in fact, as a result, they did not have time, and to be honest, they did not have wish for discussion with the local people. And this is why people in the East and in the South were so critical, not in the center also, by the way, were so critical about this politics. And this is why they voted this way in 2019. So many features which make this desovietization very Soviet enterprise.
Thank you. So, do we have more questions? If not, maybe we can say thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was really great introduction for all our project. And yes, we will visit the museums. Today we will go to the Second World War Museum, and then we will go to Babi Yar and the Museum of Occupation and so on. And also we will be in Lviv. And I think your lecture will help us a lot to understand what is going on and how we can think about the exhibitions, about these museums and all the processes in Ukraine. So
I just one mention. I just long before decommunization, I proposed to decommunize the Museum of the World War II and the statue of Motherland. So I proposed to turn the statue into cactus, and to organize the biggest tequila house in this place. But unfortunately, my proposal was not accepted. So when you will be there, just remember that it might be a cactus and the biggest tequila house in the world.
Not sure that we have such technologies turn it to the cactus. Okay, thank you, Georgiy. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, good luck in your school in Poland.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to. Yeah, yes. Bye-bye.
Good luck.
Bye.